And I pouted, and I don't know how long I pouted. It was weeks, maybe months, who knows. But eventually God kind of slapped me upside the head and said, you're really being kind of selfish. And I said, yeah, I am. And then I finally said, God, I wrote this novel for you. And I wrote it because I wanted to touch people's lives with your faithfulness, your goodness. And so, if you'll just take this book and touch one person's life, I'll be pleased. I'll be happy. Well, again, we have to fast forward. The book eventually went out of print, and it sold about 8,000 copies. That's not bad for a first-time author. But once it went out of print, I had a bunch of copies, so I just started giving them away. I figured I couldn't get people to buy them. I might as well give them to them. And I gave one to a friend of our daughter's, her mother. Her name was Terry Caffey. And I never heard anything else about it. But several years later, in fact, in just about 2 weeks, it will be the 10th anniversary of this event. Several weeks later, well, it was several years later, but the Caffeys, Terry and his wife Penny, had to make their daughter break up with a boyfriend. And several days later, that young man and another young man broke into the house. And I'm not going to go into the details, but they killed the family, except for Terry, set the house on fire. And Terry had been shot 5 times. He escaped through a bathroom window, crawled, this was March 1st, 2008, about 3 in the morning, very cold, about the same temperature as it is right now outside, crawled about 400 yards to a neighbor's house, blood loss, 5 bullet wounds. His main prayer was, Lord, let me get to the neighbors so I can identify who did this, because he'd heard one of his sons mention the young man's name, Charlie, that was the boyfriend. And he said, let me get over there and then let me die. Well, Terry got there. He didn't die. They got him to a hospital. And they told him, well, there's good news. Your daughter wasn't in the house. So even though he'd lost his wife and 2 sons and their house, at least he had somebody to get through this with. But then several hours later, they came back and they said, Terry, we have to tell you, your daughter has just been arrested. She was implicated in the crime. So not only had he lost his wife, his 2 sons, his house, everything, his own daughter was now charged with planning the very crime that took his family. Terry fell apart with good reason. Now, Terry was and is a Christian. He was about to be ordained to be an evangelist. And his life was shattered. He had to live at his sister's house, slept on the living room sofa. And at night, he was so afraid, he would sit up all night, barricade the door, and watch. He'd turn on the TV really loud so he couldn't hear any of the sounds because it was kind of a creaky old house. In the mornings, he would then double dose on Xanax and Zoloft and pain meds to knock himself out, and secretly was hoping that he wouldn't wake up. He had gotten into the habit of going out to the burned out remains of his property and digging through and trying to find things that were left over from the fire. He found some little toys and belt buckle and frying pan, stuff like that. And he went out there and he would take those and bring them home. Well, he went out one day, and by now the property had been cleared. There was nothing left there. He was standing on the blackened earth where his house used to be, and he was crying out to God, and he was saying, God, why did you let me live? Why didn't you let me die with my family? And then he looked, And about 15 feet away, leaning up against a tree, was a burned piece of paper. And that paper wasn't just any piece of paper. It was a page from my novel that had survived the fire. And it wasn't just any page from my novel, 400-page book. It wasn't just any page from my novel that had survived the fire. It was the page where my character came to grips with God's goodness in his loss. The first words that Terry saw, this is an actual scan of the burned page. You could look at it later. First words he saw were, "I couldn't understand why you would take my family and leave me behind to struggle along without them. And I guess I still don't totally understand that part of it. But I do believe you're sovereign. You're in control. And I know that you brought Justine and those children into my life. And they need me, Lord. You could have taken my life that day, but you spared it. And you've gone on sparing it. It doesn't matter what happens to me now, but if I can help them, please let me do it."